Okay, so now let's move to another national issue. It's the Nigeria Sovereign Wealth Fund. They have released the 2022 financial details of the Nigeria Sovereign Investment Authority, which recorded a 33% profit decline in the Sovereign Wealth Fund. Meanwhile, the government has injected about $1.8 billion of Nigeria's surplus income from crude oil sales into that fund so far. What does this tell us about the country's state? We have Michael Ango, his partner, Tax Advisory and Regulatory Services with Anderson, to share his thoughts and findings on this. Thank you so much, Mr. Ango, and happy holidays to you.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm great. So we saw the financials of the SWF. We saw a decrease, 33% decrease in the profits for 2022. Should we be worried? Are we in a good stance?
So I'll say yes and I'll say no. Let me start from no. I think for the benefit of our viewers, I think it's important that we understand what the Sovereign Wealth Fund, or the Nigerian Sovereign Investment Authority, is. It was set up in 2011 by its act, basically to, create a savings for Nigeria, a kind of buffer, and then, of course, do some other things like improve infrastructure, and then, have some kind of stabilization fund for Nigeria in terms of economic distress. Initial seed funding was $1 billion, which in my view was quite small. But if you recall, at that time, there were a lot of conflicts between the state and the federal government as to even the constitutionality of the agency. So to that extent, I think that the concept of the NSI is a very laudable one. And we must commend the agency itself, or the authority, I would say, for constantly, bringing out its results publicly and sharing it, of course, in line with the principles of transparency and accountability and all of that. One thing that we must also commend the authority for is that it's managed its succession seamlessly. As you recall, the first, or the pioneer MD, left last year, and there was an internal succession, and that went very smoothly. But as to these results, I think we should first look at what the positives are. So the positives is that, for the last 10 years, there has been consistent positive results for the agency over the last 10 years of its operation. Of course, its net assets also grew, I think, by about 10%, to about $1 trillion naira, excuse me. And then, of course, there was some increase in revenue from, I think, interest income, infrastructure, business, and one or two also, income lines. But the big elephant in the room, of course, is the 34% decline in total comprehensive income, as you've mentioned it. So to the extent that, the NSI was set up to manage savings for the country, it should be of worry to us that there's such a steep decline of 34% in just one financial year. But in mitigation, the MD in his press conference did mention certain reasons why that decline occurred. And he termed an acronym, which he said was VUCA. This is volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and then, of course, the ambiguity of the markets in which they invested. He also did mention things like, the China COVID lockdowns, the Russia-Ukraine war, and of course, internal factors or local factors like, rise in petroleum products, inflation, geopolitical issues, and all of that. So to that extent, you can then probably situate the decline in profits, as it were. But to the extent that you're looking to the NSIE to always turn in a profit and also continue to contribute to the overall economic well-being of the country, then yes, you may say that these results create a bit of a concern, especially for the shareholders who are the federal government that holds about 46%, the states 36%, local governments about 18% thereabout. So they should be worried, of course. The question is then, what should be done going forward?
Yeah, before we come to what should be done going forward, we know that the NSIA is funded mainly from surplus from sale of Nigeria's crude. We see what's happening to the price of Brent, especially as it concerns us in the global space. And we're also talking about ending the subsidy regime. How does that affect the NSIA?
Okay, so let me correct you. The NSI is not primarily funded by, excess crude revenues. It did receive its initial seed funding from the excess crude revenues, but over the last few years, what the NSI has done is to try to, fund its own operations from its profits and all of that. Yes, I think that ordinarily, given the impressive or the high crude prices over the last year or two that we saw in the global market due to, of course, Russia, Ukraine, and some of the other issues, we would have expected that Nigeria would have earned more crude dollars, and some of these crude dollars could have found their way into the hands of the NSI. But we know the issues we deal with in Nigeria in terms of theft of crude and all of that. So Nigeria has not really benefited in the way that other large crude producers like Russia, like Qatar, and like Saudi Arabia have benefited. So to that extent, you cannot put that on the NSIA. But I think that in the same press conference, the MD did mention certain areas which the NSIA was looking to. He mentioned the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative. He mentioned, of course, investments in infrastructure, agric, gas utilization, the ammonia plant, and all of that. So some of these projects, look like projects that should be viable in the, long term. But the truth about investments, again, is that, investors always want to see immediate returns. And I do not think that, the federal or state governments, would be waiting, for 10 or 15-year investments to mature. So I think the challenge for the NSI is to find those short-term investments that can quickly turn a profit for them. Of course, in that same press conference, he did mention that the drop in revenue or income was largely due to the, Future Generations Fund and the Stabilization Fund, which didn't see the same type of growth that they had seen in the last year or in previous years. So I think the challenge for this new management is to see how, they can invest in those short-term, assets and then look to improve or turn around the profit as quick as possible, while, of course, still focusing on some of these long-term investments in infrastructure, in agric, as it were. So yes, there is a lot of work to be done. And I think and I believe that, the management of the NSI should be up to the task.
So, I mean, because even the short-term investments you talked about, they're also exposed to, the macroeconomic realities, which seem to be hitting everybody. So whatever decision they take at the end of the day, I think it still has a national impact, on Nigeria, on them.
You're absolutely right. And of course, he did mention, of course, that one of the factors was also the general tightening of monetary policy. He also mentioned inflation. He mentioned the cost of petroleum products, food inflation in Nigeria, and that all this, stifled growth. We must understand that some of the investments of the NSIE are also local investments. So not all of these investments are done in other jurisdictions. Some of these investments are local investments. So naturally, if the economy is not growing at a particular rate, then you do not expect that any investments in that same economy will see significant growth. There's some investment that have been done in healthcare, for example, the cancer center at the Lute, and all of that. Some of these investments, could also be, monetized to the extent that, you are able to, of course, attract significant patronage of these things. You look at things like aviation infrastructure in Nigeria, which we know is very poor. We've seen the Qatar Sovereign Wealth Fund invest in Heathrow, for example. We've seen them invest in some other airports. We've seen also the Qatar Sovereign Investment Agency invest in property in the United Kingdom, and they've turned around significant profits. So maybe what the NSI needs to begin to look at is to look at investments that will be largely immune, or at least that will not suffer from significant distortions within the local economy. But of course, the agency or the authority exists in Nigeria, and so whatever happens in Nigeria would likely impact,
Exactly.
how its investments turn out.
Exactly. Thank you so much, Mr. Michael Angu, Partner, Tax Advisory and Regulatory Services with Anderson.
Thank you very much.
All right, let's take a breather now. When we come back, talking about inflation and what it has to do with the economy, how it affects microfinance banks. We'll find out after the break here on Business Morning on Channels Television.